would like to invite Juan Luis Alcazar, who will have a talk on the ultrasonic criteria of a good endometrium. Please enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, good morning, everyone. I would like first to thank to the organizing committee, particularly to Attilio, Luis, and Sergio, because I think that after we have heard these days, they gave me the easiest lecture I have ever given. So this is in my heart. I wouldn't forget. So ultrasonographic criteria for good endometrium. This isn't a statement, but I want to transform in a question. Is there any sonographic criteria for a good endometrium? Well, I think we should start doing the thing well. So properly, the methodology, machine settings, how we measure, and how we set our machine for a proper measurement or for a proper assessment of the endometrium is essential. So, and I think that everyone who is involved in sonographic assessment in reproductive medicine should be properly trained, and he or she should work with a proper machine. Otherwise, it could be more difficult. And when we thought about sonographic features related to the optimal endometrium, we have to think about endometrial thickness. We have to think about endometrial, subendometrial flow using color Doppler, power Doppler. Right now, super microvascular flow. We have to think about the endometrial pattern, and this means the cohenicity, endometrial volume, and also we have to think about 3D vascular assessment of both endometrial and subendometrial flow. So what about endometrial thickness? Technically, it seems to be very easy. Mid-sagittal plane of the uterus, including both endometrial layers, and in the thickest part that subjectively we think that is the thickest part of the endometrium. But we have to take into account the intra-observer variation. When we will see later on, when we look for so strict cutoffs regarding endometrial thickness, we have to think that the inter-observer variability could be up to 2 plus less millimeter, and the intra-observer variability is about 1 plus less millimeter. So, and when we look for so strict cutoffs, as I told you, we have to take this into account before deciding what is an optimal endometrium or what is not. So there are a lot of papers assessing the endometrial thickness as a parameter to predict the results of ART techniques. And this is one of the largest published in the literature. And as you can see here, the relative risk for succeed is usually about 10 millimeters, between 9 and 12. But this meta-analysis, published years ago, observed that there is no significant difference between all these cutoffs, but below 7. And it came to our mind that below 7 should be a thin endometrium. But my colleague afterwards will talk about this. In the Spanish group, within the Spanish Society, we have just working on a new meta-analysis, and we have tried to look at this feature, particularly which could be an optimal endometrium for transfer from the NNH point of view, the number of patients needed to harm, and to harm mean to fail. So when we review the literature, and you can see here for fresh embryo transfers, the number of patients who fail with 6 millimeters is going to be 1 in 4. However, if we go to 14, the number of patients who is going to fail is 1 in 12. So clearly, this is much better than this. And if you see the curve for embryo implantation for clinical pregnancy, between each cutoff, there is a significant benefit or less harm, depending on how you go in the curve, to this way or to that way. We will gain with each millimeter of thickness, but particularly between 10, this increase is significantly higher. For clinical pregnancy, for live birth, and when you look at miscarriage, the number of miscarriage almost didn't change a lot regarding the endometrial thickness. When we go to frozen embryo transfer, we got the same features. We got the same scenario. So it seems to be that above 8 millimeters could be an optimal, but particularly could be more optimal if we got an endometrial thickness above between 10 and 13. Regarding the endometrial pattern, I know every one of you who are doing ultrasound before embryo transfers want this pattern, trilaminar pattern, no doubt. But the question is if this pattern is really helpful to predict what is going to happen after the transfer. And in that meta-analysis I show you, the sensitivity for implantation is good, but the specificity is very poor. Just 11 studies with more than 15,000 ladies. So it seems that endometrial pattern could be helpful. When we mix endometrial pattern and endometrial thickness, things seems to be a little bit wrong because both together don't increase our capacity to predict what's happening after the transfer. So it seems that adding the endometrial pattern don't give us any further clinical information. Regarding endometrial flow, we do have very scanty flows of endometrial flow just reaching the basal, in penetrating the endometrium or reaching the midline, which is, the midline is just a sonographic feature. There is no tissue there. It's a sonographic finding. It's just the apposition of the two functional endometrial layers. So there is no tissue, there is no vessels there, okay? It's just a physical observation from the sonographic point of view. So pattern means very low flow, to Appelbaum classification from A to D. This is the best flow we can find out in our clinical scenario. But when we go to the Krashunas meta-analysis, the sensitivity for this pattern, reaching the midline endometrium, is very high, but the specificity is very low, but just one single study with 180 women. What about the endometrial volume? Using 3D, we can calculate the endometrial volume, and what we can say from the meta-analytic point of view is that an endometrium, to predict a receptive endometrium with a volume larger than 2 milliliters, the sensitivity is pretty good, specificity pretty bad. And then only one study again, one little bit more than 100 patients. And what about endometrial 3D vascular assessment? We can calculate the endometrial assessment of the subendometrial blood flow, theoretically the blood flow in the junctional zone, but nobody knows. Actually, I don't know. I have been working for this for years and not convinced that we are really looking at junctional flow, blood flow, but people say that. And when you look at the reviews of the literature, meta-analysis, our review, actually, neither endometrial volume nor 3D vascular assessment are really good predictors for IVF results. So actually, we cannot consider these parameters to define what it is an optimal sonographic endometrium. So coming to my end, very short presentation. What could be considered an optimal sonographic endometrium? If I had to answer that question, I would say that based on the literature, the optimal endometrium should be that who has an endometrial thickness 10, 15 millimeters, triple line pattern, and with intra-endometrial vascularization. Thank you so much.